Ben, since we have you here, I wanted our main topic today to be at the very crux of your soul. So
yes.
I want to know, what do we put into a dark fantasy campaign that might be different from a typical Dungeons and Dragons high fantasy setting or adventure?
It's a great question, and sometimes it's a little bit of a difficult question to answer only because dark fantasy as a term means different things to different people. It's a genre. I said this on another podcast, that dark fantasy is like the new metal of fantasy genres, because it's kind of a blending of a lot of different other genres that find its kind of nougaty, delicious center by drawing from different things. Because in my mind, it's not horror purely. It's not high fantasy, obviously, but it's not grimdark. I make a real distinction between grimdark, which is the Warhammer 40k and the Age of Sigmar settings, which are really like everything sucks all the time. Dark fantasy, I think, that separates it from high fantasy, as you kind of asked, just wants to trouble the notions, I think, of good and evil, trouble the notions of simple answers to complex problems. The fact that, like, you know, and we see this in high fantasy a lot when it tries to subvert expectations. You know, when the princess has been taken by the dragon and then the party go and discover that the dragon's actually kind of all right. You know, that's kind of a common trope that started to come up in subverting expectations in high fantasy as well. But in a high fantasy context, what that might look like is the dragon's actually a perfectly nice person, and this has been a misunderstanding, and the king is really evil. Whereas a dark fantasy will say the dragon is dangerous. It has killed people. It has leveled villages. But here are the reasons why it has done this, and the reasons why it's redeemable. And here are the reasons the king has sent you to kill it, and the reasons that the king, you know, he's trying to protect his people, although he also has a vested interest maybe in getting the dragon's hoard. You know, like there's blood on both sides is kind of the exploration that dark fantasy provides in a role-playing sense. And the goal is not to morally checkmate your players or try to put them in a completely no-win situation, but to let players and you, the GM, explore questions of morality and humanity through your role-playing games. What would I do if I was in this situation? What do I actually think of this, you know? And then, you know, good dark fantasy typically will borrow from the horror genre to try to make the setting feel as dark as possible. It will borrow, you know, from other settings where magic will usually be part of it, but magic is dangerous and eldritch and people don't understand how it really works, and that makes it, you know, that can lead to its own moral quandaries. I'm probably going to start rambling here as I just scattershot like tropes of dark fantasy at you. So
that's cool. I want to ask you. No, I want to ask you a question then. What to you is the difference between dark fantasy and something like Ravenloft, a more gothic fantasy?
Sure.
Is there a difference in there to you?
I think it depends on your tone and your approach to Ravenloft, and this is kind of why I think that dark fantasy is the new metal of fantasy genres, is because dark fantasy can look beautiful. It doesn't have to be gothic. We did a video on the Ghostfire Gaming YouTube channel about the season 1 of Arcane, the Netflix TV series, which currently has its season 2 coming out. No spoilers. But it is a very dark fantasy show in its themes and its moral questions that it asks, and the character development and the tragedies that unfold on that show. But it doesn't look dark fantasy because it's not. There are horror elements kind of in there, but they're not the central kind of part of that show. And so Ravenloft can be dark fantasy if you really lean into a sense of a despicable but redeemable Strahd, if he's the villain of your campaign. Okay. Or Ravenloft can be kind of Halloween-y if you make Strahd, you know, like Count Von Count the Muppet, you know, like even gothic horror or gothic fantasy, if you will, is malleable to be used in different ways depending on the sort of game you want to run. And if you want a deep exploration of Strahd's psyche or the mythology of vampirism and how it is a representation of what we humanity hate about ourselves, then you can play it as a dark fantasy setting. But if you want the Halloweeny like monster mash, and now there's werewolves showing up and they're always like scratching their ears with their back legs and things like that, you can play it that way. So it's not inherently dark fantasy or not. I think the gothic horror does lend itself in folks' minds to dark fantasy very well because it has a lot of the trappings of horror and kind of gothicness. But also some people find that fairly played out by now. You know, werewolves aren't particularly scary on their own in a vacuum because folks know what the werewolf myth is and know how to kill them. And so some people find it hard to access dark fantasy through gothic horror and Ravenloft specifically. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And in fact, that leads me to a question. You said everyone knows how to kill a werewolf, and everyone knows or thinks they know how to kill a vampire. How important is that sense of mystery and needing to do something other than just rely on the standard myths in order to bring a dark fantasy story to life for the players?
You can definitely subvert expectations in terms of those myths. You know, one of my favorite moments in a game that I played was where the players thought they were safe inside a house and the vampire kind of comes up to the door and he's like, door frames, my weakness. And then just like steps across the door frame and smiles at them because that myth is complete posh in the world that I had created. You might prefer to keep that particular myth for vampires for whatever reason. I think the way to like, if you want to keep a lot of those myths intact, and you certainly don't have to, and again, as I just said, gothic horror and gothic iconography and gothic tropes and themes and monsters are not inherent to dark fantasy. You can do dark fantasy with a Fey realm. You could do it with eldritch horror, very, very famously. You can do it with kind of Norse-inspired horror, as we do in Grim Hollow. But building mystery is a kind of cornerstone, I think, of good dark fantasy, and making that mystery seem disconcerting and horrible, but you can still lean into the tropes of a monster by just not telling them what the monster is at the start of the session and being like, okay, there's something living in the woods. You need to go out and find its lair and slay it because it's been killing villagers. And as the party start to investigate, they can't find a lair. They're like, what is this? There's no monster out here. I can't understand what is killing these people because there's no tracks left behind that we can follow. And then through investigation, they learn, oh no, the monster is living in the village. The monster's one of the villagers. Oh, we've got a werewolf on our hands. Now finding out which villager is the werewolf becomes the difficulty and the mystery. And how do you find a werewolf hidden in a village? You stab it with silver. Everybody bleeds when they get stabbed with silver. That's not helpful. And so, yeah, finding little ways to subvert those expectations and not just like tell the party, oh, there's a werewolf living in the woods, go get it. That not having that mystery initially is what's going to undermine any hope of tension or horror.
All right. So that leads to my next question, which is, I've always said horror is hard to do with D&D because for me, horror has an element of incompetence in the protagonist.
Sure.
Whereas D&D, the characters are competent right from level one. They are stronger. They are more impactful. They have more raw power and more staying power than an average person. Does 5e D&D present itself as a good rule set for a dark fantasy game in your estimation?
If you're asking like just the core rule book, the player's handbook, the monster manual, the Dungeon Master's Guide, let's take the three of them. I can see why people are hesitant to use it or claim that there are better systems. There probably are. the reason that I use 5e and I continue to use 5e and I enjoy using 5e is because there's several things as the game master that you can do to try to up that sense of horror and that sense of quote unquote incompetence within the player characters. But just on that note, I want to make a distinction here. And this is why I think dark fantasy borrows from horror heavily, but it doesn't need to. It's not the horror genre. And this is why. Most folk are really surprised to learn I don't like horror movies all that much. I can't watch a Saw movie. I can't watch a slasher movie. I'm fascinated by the Terrifier movies at the moment, but I would not watch one because just the absolute shock horror violence in it would make me scream. I really kind of am fascinated by The Substance, but I don't want to watch it because I know that it'll just make me super, super uncomfortable. And it's because horror movies tend to have that nihilistic view and ending where, and I hope I'm not spoiling any horror movies here for anybody, but like even if Jason Voorhees, even if he is defeated at the end of whatever movie he's featured in, there's usually some stinger that he's going to come back at the end. Or, Drag Me to Hell famously has an ending where the person thinks they've escaped the monster and they get dragged to hell in the very last minutes of the movie. Spoilers for Drag to Hell. It's about 15 years old by now.
It's literally the name of the movie.
Yeah, exactly. Smile kind of has I haven't seen the second one, so no spoilies there, but the first one very much is nihilistic. The person does not succeed, and the monster wins. Dark fantasy, I think it's still got fantasy in the name, and I think it provides a different kind of power fantasy to what high fantasy does. And high fantasy provides this, I am a hero, I am Superman, stuff bounces off of me, I am, the greatest hero there ever was, and I am going to teach evil a lesson. Oh, bad guy, you're going to rue the day that you forged that ring because I am coming for you. I am Aragorn, son of Arathorn, and my destiny is to overthrow you somehow. Dark fantasy presents you with an unwinnable situation, but the power fantasy is to get up anyway. The house is haunted. You can't defeat the ghost in there with your swords, but you are going to choose to step in anyway because that's what the right thing to do is, in your estimation. The demon lord eats souls, and there's no way that I can defeat him as a level 5 character because he's a, CR whatever, but I am going to try to do what I can to undermine him anyway. And it's that kind of, I think of like video games that I've played. The Wolf Among Us is this game where you are the big bad wolf, but you're just a guy. You kind of there's a werewolfy kind of thing going on with it. And I just remember like knowing that I had to go fight these other mythological creatures that were much stronger than me. I think it was like Grendel and something else. And you get out of the cab and you're just a dude with a pair of fists and a bad attitude. And you're like, I'm going to step in here and throw down, even though I know this is going to hurt, and that's the power fantasy of dark fantasy, is not knowing there's no risk, but is sacrificing and taking the risk to do the heroic thing anyway. And so that's what you're trying to present to your players is like, this is a bad situation. You may not survive. You have to give something to succeed here. You're not going to get a perfectly happy ending because you have to sacrifice these people to succeed over here. Someone's going to die in this situation, but it doesn't mean that everybody has to die if you make a choice here, if that makes sense.
So I want to wrap up here because I know we've got more to talk about. Go on
forever.
Elsewhere. But I want to ask, you said the 3 core books probably not perfect for dark fantasy. What's the one thing that we've added via Grim Hollow? The most important thing to not just get the story moving in the right direction, but get the players in the mindset for this dark fantasy thing that we're doing.
Well, just to indulge myself for a moment longer here to talk about systems, because I know I talked a lot about kind of the feel a moment ago, and that might not have quite answered the question as to why 5e is a good system, is because the party is still empowered by the system to be able to fight the monsters. Right. Just use higher CR monsters, or find bigger challenges. Don't expect that the players are going to be make them have to be clever to fight the monster somehow. it has way too many hit points unless you find its specific weakness, that sort of thing. And then I think on the other end, in Grim Hollow Transformed, and something that's existed in Grim Hollow previously, but we're kind of updating it and refining it, and I wrote these rules actually just about a week or two ago, is the changes in the resting system. D&D 2024 gives much more robust descriptions of what a long rest and a short rest do, which has allowed us with Grim Hollow Transform to give really robust descriptions and detailed descriptions about what a quick rest, a short rest, and a long rest do, how long they are, what you get back from them in terms of your hit dice, your class features, your health. And basically, a long rest takes a whole day with 2 kind of 8-hour sleeps on either end of it. I think I describe it a bit more concisely than that in the rules. And it can only be done in a place of safety. You can't cast the Dome of Safety, whatever that spell is called, Tiny Hut, and just crowd into it on the villain's doorstep and not have to worry about it unless he has Dispel Magic. You know what I mean?
Right.
Don't worry, it's a wyvern. We don't need to worry that he's going to cast Dispel Magic. Let's all go to sleep. You need to be in a place of safety. And stretching out the resources that are available to the party makes travel more dangerous because they don't get all their resources back at the end of every day of travel. It can make dungeon delving much more dangerous because they can't get all their resources back in the dungeon. They have to leave and go back to the village. And so having less resources to just supernova each encounter inherently makes them feel more dangerous, even if you're not upping the CR of the monsters at all that they have to fight. And I think that creates a feeling of real struggle in each combat and decision making as well. Do we fight these bandits knowing that there might be a pack of wolves or something further up on the track? Is it worth draining our resources, or do we just pay them now to not have to worry about it?
Yeah, I love that. I love that idea, and I think what you said there is perfect. You don't need to increase the strength of the enemies if those resources are a little more stretched thin, and it does give that idea of just a little bit more danger, a little bit different from a high fantasy sort of game where laying on the ground for 8 hours was wonderful. Yeah.
One of my most it just leaves a bad taste in my mouth, and I say this with all love and affection for the group, but there was like a big army that they had to infiltrate, and they got discovered, and they went into a cave and cast the hut spell, and were just trying to long rest while literally being guarded. For as soon as that bubble broke, they were going to get swarmed, but they didn't care as long as they got the long rest in. And the narrative disconnect in my mind, the incongruousness of it was upsetting.
Yes. Well, we will not be incongruous with our message here. This is an abbreviated version because of tech issues, but Ben, thank you so much for coming on and talking with us about the news and our answers and dark fantasy, and tell everybody where they can find you and your work.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, folks are always welcome to come hang out with Shawn as well on the Eldritch Lorecast. We record every week. We have a YouTube channel. We're on Spotify. We're in all the places you'll find Mastering Dungeons. You can also check out the Ghostfire Gaming YouTube channel, where I'm kind of flying a bit more solo, but talking about a lot of, when I say I'm flying solo there, a lot of the stuff I talk about is content that either Shawn or one of our other freelancers has written that I get to kind of espouse to the public about how great it is, to the community about how great it is. I'm the Byrne on Blue Sky, seems to be the cool hangout place now. And if you're so inclined, check out Grim Hollow if you like dark fantasy, because that's my jam. And if I've made it sound appealing, go check it out.
Yeah, definitely. So thank you, Ben. Thank you, everyone out there listening. If you'd like to become a patron of the show, you can go to patreon.com/masteringdnd. And hopefully next week, we will have all the tech issues sorted out, and we will be able to give you the full-length version of the show that you have come to love. So thank you so much, and we will see you next time. And I was going to say babada babada babada, but that's the wrong show.